So I want you to start by just putting a very specific mental image in your head.
Okay, I'm ready.
It is the summer of 1949, July to be exact, and we are in Paris.
Right?
And, the Second World War has been over for about 4 years at this point, but Europe is still it's a mess.
Oh, absolutely. Still rebuilding, millions of refugees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in a room, right in the center of the city, a group of men in exile are gathering. Now, usually when we start talking about exile committees, it sounds maybe a little dry.
Yeah, you picture older guys sitting around drinking coffee, complaining about the old country.
Right. But this wasn't a coffee club. We are doing a deep dive today into the Free Albania National Committee, or the NCFA.
And the atmosphere in that room in Paris would have been incredibly tense.
Because these weren't just politicians.
No, not at all. A lot of the men sitting around that table had literally been shooting at each other just a few years prior.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
On paper, if you just look at their official mission, it sounds very unified and straightforward.
Organize the diaspora.
Yep. Cooperate with Western powers and overthrow the communist regime of Enver Hoxha back in Albania.
A simple, noble goal for an exile group.
But when you actually peel back the layers, and especially when you look at the documents that were only released to the public in 2013, this story is just chaotic.
It really is.
We're talking about deep CIA involvement, secret military units training in Germany, complex Cold War politics.
It is honestly the perfect case study for how the early Cold War was actually fought.
How so?
Well, we tend to think of the Cold War as nuclear standoffs. The Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The big flashy moments.
Exactly. But in 1949, it was much grittier. It was fought through shadow committees, strange alliances. And for the Albanian diaspora, it was about a really desperate, fractured group of people trying to reclaim their homeland.
So let's get into that fractured group, because the cast of characters here is fascinating.
It's quite the lineup.
The formation story really starts in Rome in 1948, but they officially launch in Paris on July 1st, 1949. And the sources we're looking at call the members heterogeneous. Which is a very polite diplomatic way of saying these guys hated each other.
Yeah, heterogeneous is doing a lot of heavy lifting in those documents.
Break down the factions for us. Who is actually in this room?
Okay, so on one side, you have the Balli Kombëtar, the National Front.
Right.
These are your Republicans, your nationalists. They're led by a man named Mithat Frashëri, who actually becomes the committee chairman. He's an intellectual writer, very respected figure.
So you got the Republicans, but then sitting across from them, you have the monarchists.
Right. The Legaliteti, led by Abaz, Kupi.
And Kupi is a totally different kind of leader, right?
Completely. Kupi isn't a writer. He's a military man, a guerrilla fighter. And he is fiercely loyal to the former king of Albania, King Zog.
So you have Republicans and monarchists.
And independent guerrilla fighters like Said Bekraziu, anti-fascist, anti-communist fighters.
But the tension wasn't just political disagreement.
No, during World War II, the National Front and the monarchists were basically fighting a civil war against each other.
While also fighting the Italians.
And the Germans. And the communists.
So telling them to sit down and form a joint committee in 1949 is like asking oil and water to mix.
But the oil and water are heavily armed and have a lot of bad blood.
And yet, they did it. Or at least they managed to fake it for the cameras. But there was one group that was explicitly left out.
The Baloku Independent.
Right. And this is where the U.S. State Department steps in. Why were they the odd ones out?
This is a really interesting look at Western pragmatism at the time. The Baloku Independent was a group made up of pro-Italian and pro-German collaborationists.
People who had worked with the Axis powers during the occupation.
Exactly. And you have to remember, this is 1949. The U.S. is definitely shifting its focus to fight communism.
But the ink on the World War II treaties is barely dry.
Yes. The memories are too fresh. The U.S. State Department could not be seen backing a liberation committee that included guys who had just been working with Mussolini or Hitler.
It would have been a PR nightmare.
A massive propaganda victory for the Soviets. They'd just point and say, look, the Americans are rebuilding the Axis powers.
So even though the Baloku members were anti-communist, the U.S. just flat out rejected them.
They told them to stay out. They allowed some unaffiliated guerrillas in, but the collaborators were banned.
Which, according to the sources, caused huge confrontations.
Shouting matches. It was not a happy family. It was a forced alliance dictated by whoever was holding the purse strings.
Which was the West. So they have their curated team. Frashëri is the chairman. Kupi is the head of the military junta.
Right.
Now they just need legitimacy. And for a huge chunk of the Albanian diaspora, legitimacy meant getting the blessing of King Zog.
Ah, King Zog. He is such a wild card in this whole story.
He's living in exile in Alexandria, Egypt at this point.
And he very much still considers himself the sole legitimate ruler of Albania.
The British intelligence officers, guys like Billy McLean and Alan Hare, actually fly out to Egypt to meet with him.
They want his endorsement.
Right. I just love picturing this. These British spies in linen suits, sweating in the Egyptian summer, trying to pitch this committee to an exiled king. And Zog he refuses.
Flat out refuses. Because for Zog, recognizing the committee would be admitting he wasn't the sole authority.
He felt like he was the state.
Exactly. If he joins the committee, he's just another guy at the table. He argued that he was the only legal representative of Albania.
Which is so deeply ironic when you think about it.
Because of Abaz Kupi.
Yes. Kupi, one of the main founders of this committee, is a die-hard Zog supporter.
He's the head of the monarchist faction.
And his own monarch won't even acknowledge the group exists. That has to completely undermine Kupi's position.
It made the whole thing look incredibly shaky from the start, but they pushed forward anyway.
They did. September 6, 1949, they go public.
The BBC transmission.
Right. They get on the BBC, which was huge. They announced the Free Albania National Committee to the world.
For the people listening inside Albania, that must have been a massive moment of hope.
But then, almost immediately, they run into another wall. And this one really shows the tightrope they were walking with their Western sponsors.
You're talking about the press conference?
Yeah. Mithat Frashëri holds a press conference after the announcement. And he brings up Kosovo.
Which was a massive blunder in the eyes of the British.
And if you're listening to this and you know the region, an Albanian nationalist bringing up Kosovo makes total sense. So why were the British so annoyed?
Okay, so look at the geopolitical map in 1949. Kosovo is part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is run by Tito. Tito is a communist dictator. But, and this is the crucial part, he had just famously split from Stalin.
Tito-Stalin split.
Yeah.
So Tito is a communist, but he's not aligned with Moscow anymore.
Exactly. So London and Washington are falling all over themselves trying to court Tito. They want to keep him away from the Soviet bloc.
So when Frashëri stands up in Paris and starts talking about Kosovo,
he is basically threatening to take territory away from Yugoslavia.
Threatening the guy the West is trying to make friends with.
Yes. The British authorities clamped down hard. They insisted Frashëri could only speak about territories currently within the recognized Albanian state borders.
Just a stark reminder of who was actually in charge.
Exactly. As impartial observers, when we look at these documents, it's clear the West didn't necessarily share the committee's nationalist goals. They were just using them as a tool in the broader Cold War strategy.
Keep Tito happy, contain the Soviets. Everything else is secondary.
Right.
Okay, so that's the political drama in Paris and London. But let's get into the twist, the part that reads like a spy thriller.
The 2013 document release.
Yes. Those documents confirm that the CIA wasn't just casually supportive. They were deeply involved in sponsoring this committee.
They were bankrolling it. And it wasn't just for propaganda. They were building a military unit.
Company 4000.
Company 4000. It sounds like something out of a movie.
It really does. What was it?
In 1950, the committee helped the CIA form this secret paramilitary unit. They were stationed in Hohenbrunn, Bavaria, in West Germany.
So they're taking these exiles, these refugees, and training them as a secret army.
Exactly. Training them to parachute back into Albania, link up with local resistance, and violently topple the Hoxha regime.
And did it work?
No. The historical verdict on Company 4000 is incredibly blunt. It was, quote, never effective.
Never effective. That's a brutal assessment.
It was a disaster. The men they sent in were quickly compromised. The Hoxha regime was just too entrenched. The security apparatus was too strong. The whole paramilitary ambition just completely fell apart.
So the invasion fails. What happens to the committee?
Well, they have to pivot. And they physically relocate. They move their base of operations from Europe to New York City.
And there's a big shift in leadership around this time, too.
Yeah. Mithat Frashëri actually died very shortly after the committee was formed, in October of 1949.
Just a few months in.
Right. Hassan Dosti took over briefly after that. But the guy who became the long-term chairman was Recep Kresniki.
A Kosovar Albanian.
Yes, and he was supported by ex-Afrodiva. They became the core leadership as the committee settled into its new life in America.
And their tactics had to change, right? Because the world was changing.
Drastically. In 1955, Albania officially joined the United Nations.
Which completely changes the diplomatic landscape.
You can't just sponsor a secret guerrilla army to invade a recognized UN member state, not without causing a massive international incident.
So the military dream is dead.
It's over. The committee shifts away from trying to invade and focuses on trying to influence.
They became part of the ACNA, right?
The Assembly of Captive European Nations.
What was that?
It was basically an umbrella organization used by the U.S. State Department. It brought together national bodies from 9 different Eastern Bloc countries.
So they're organizing political gatherings.
Conferences, seminars, lobbying. They became the political voice for a country that couldn't speak for itself.
But the thing that really stands out to me, and I think this is the most incredible part of their story, is their humanitarian work.
Oh, without a doubt. It's a massive contrast to the military failure of Company 4000.
Right, because they couldn't save the country militarily. But the sources show they managed to resettle 15,000 Albanian refugees in the United States.
15,000. It's an astounding number when you think about the logistics of that in the 1950s and 60s.
These were people stuck in camps in Italy and Greece.
With nowhere to go. And the committee worked the system, vouched for them, and brought them over.
They basically built the foundation of the Albanian American diaspora.
They absolutely did. And they kept the culture alive, too. They ran publications, a paper called Shqipëria, which just means Albania.
And later on, the Free Albanian?
Right, which ran all the way until 1970. They were publishing news, preserving the language, pushing back against the regime's propaganda.
So they transitioned from this CIA-backed paramilitary group into essentially a refugee aid and cultural preservation organization.
A very successful one at that.
So how does it all end? We know Hoxha's regime eventually falls.
Right. Communism collapses in Eastern Europe. And in 1992, the committee officially disbands.
Because they won.
Because, as they put it, their functions would no longer be needed. The Cold War was over. Albania was opening up. The reason for their existence in exile was gone.
Wow. From a secret meeting in Paris plotting an invasion to a quiet disbandment in New York 43 years later.
It's quite the journey.
It really makes you think about the complexity of liberation. You know, the West backed this committee of former enemies, hoping they'd spark a revolution.
And that completely failed.
But the regime eventually fell anyway, just from internal collapse.
Right.
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought to mull over.
What's that?
Well, you look at their original goal. Overthrow the government. They failed. But you look at the 15,000 lives they saved through resettlement, the communities they built, the culture they preserved in exile.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, was the committee's true legacy the government they didn't overthrow, or the 15,000 lives they saved?
That is a very good question to leave it on.
Thanks for diving into this with me.
Anytime.
And to you listening, thanks for joining us in this deep dive. We will catch you next time.